So my name is Nick Silver. I'm Radix, the think tank of the Radical Centre. We're delighted to be hosting an event at the Big Tent Festival, conversation between Ayesha Hazarika and Rory Stewart to discuss the Radical Centre, what the future is for centrism. What we mean by centrism is non-partisan, the middle ground, and we're delighted to be here at the Big Tent Festival because the Big Tent is kind of what we're about. It's discussing new ideas in a new way, collaborative, non-conflicting, cross-party. It's all the things that we're going away from in British politics, and it's all the things that we need now today.
Rory Stewart is a man who really does need little introduction. You've really sort of burst onto the political scene over the last year because of the Tory leadership contest, and somebody said to me, you might not have won, but you were sort of the moral victor.
It was an extraordinary experience because I had sat very geekily before I went for the leadership and done a little flowchart trying to work out how different things would affect the likelihood of being able to make the case, as I was trying to make the case, for the centre ground. And I'd actually concluded before I ran that it was going to be almost impossible to win. This is a very, very high-risk strategy, right? He's floating along his zip wire towards his pot of gold, right? But he may not get to that pot of gold, and if he doesn't, he is trapped into saying that he will leave the European Union on the 31st of October, do or die, come what may. In other words, if he doesn't get a deal, he's going to go out with no deal. He is prepared to go out with no deal.
Now, if you cannot change the legislation, and if the nuclear option, which the only one that's left on the table, is a vote of no confidence, and to install, let's say, Jeremy Corbyn as an interim caretaker leader, is that something you are prepared to countenance?
No, I don't want a Jeremy Corbyn government. I really don't feel that's helpful.
Even if that's the only way to stop one?
I don't see how it would help at all. Right? I mean, I think you should not be getting into the business of a new government without a general election. Essentially, what I'm trying to do, and it feels as though it's almost impossible at the moment, is say we have to compromise. That if we end up with a world in which we are either no deal or remain for the next 40 years, this is going to be a very, very divided country. One of the problems here is that there is no word for somebody like me, right? Somebody's trying to get a compromise. Everybody is apparently either a Brexiteer who wants a hard no-deal Brexit, or if they oppose that, they're somehow a Remainer, right? And this has been the problem from the beginning. We need to find a way of talking about bringing the country together, understanding this was a 52-48 vote. It was very, very close. It divides the country right down the middle. And we need to find some way of talking about a compromise. That's what I liked about the withdrawal agreement. And of course, because I voted for the withdrawal agreement, by definition, I'm not a Remainer.
It does feel that the centre ground is struggling to find its voice at a time when, paradoxically, there does seem to be this great dissatisfaction with how polarised politics is. What is your kind of analysis of why the centre ground is struggling so much, and where do we go?
I think the problem is that everybody likes the centre ground in theory, and you can sit in a tent and be sort of quite cheered up by the idea of the centre ground, but when people come to vote, they tend to fall back on much clearer party lines. And it's partly because the flaw of the centre ground, usually, is that it sounds like a defence of the status quo, defence of the way things are. It sounds like a rather sort of complicated way of saying nothing can really change, it's all fine. And of course, people want change, really, really want change. And the advantage that Jeremy Corbyn has, or that the right of the Conservative Party have, is that they are promising a completely different thing. I mean, they talk about this sort of grand, radical visions. Now, I think those visions are fairy stories. I think what's lacking in politics today is the how, right? They're very good at saying, this is where we're going to go, very bad at saying how they're going to get there. But something in politics means that voters are also not very interested in the how. They're a bit depressed by the how. In our own lives, we're fine on the how. So if I say to you, if you're living with me, and I say to you, we're moving to Mauritius next year for 15 years, and we're going to have a lovely life in a £10 million mansion in Mauritius, you would say, how, right? But in politics, you say that, and everyone's like, such optimism, such belief. Let's try, right?
But I do think that one of the interesting things about how the centre ground revitalises itself is how you meld together. I think you're absolutely right in terms of it's not just money, but money is also, and funding is an important part. And I think that's where there needs to be some quite interesting and creative thinking and compromise from both sides, because you want the centre to be the best of the centre left and the centre right. I think it is important to have a mix of people in politics, and I do think the centre ground sometimes gets typified. No offence, because we're all lovely people, obviously, but it sometimes gets typified as it's politics for people like us, sort of benevolently, sort of preaching down to other people. Are you going to stay in the party? Does it feel like this is still your party?
I think it has to be all to play for. I think we just have to be brave and accept that the vast majority of my constituents are moderate, thoughtful, sensible people. Whatever their views are on Brexit or whatever, in their everyday lives they are pragmatic, sensible, thoughtful people. That the majority of my colleagues in Parliament are very much like that. That my party has, I'm a conservative because I believe in limited government, respect for individual rights, prudence at home, restraint abroad, love of tradition, love of country. I mean, these things are deeply embedded, and I don't see why. Well, in fact, I know. I mean, it may not be immediately, it may take 5, maybe take 10 years. I hope it doesn't take that long. In the end, good, thoughtful, truthful arguments triumph.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, I'm afraid we've run out of time, but thank you all so much for coming and for your thoughtful questions, and please give a huge round of applause for the terrific Rory Stewart. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.